My name is Linda. Standing in the doorway of my kitchen, I'm jolted by my daughter's harsh voice cutting through the Christmas Eve festivities. Where are you? You're useless. The dinner's not ready, and my guests are staring at empty plates. The words hit me like a sledgehammer, and I almost dropped the tray in my hands. Tonight, in this house that I've paid off after years of hard work, my daughter, Sarah, treats me like an unworthy servant. The living room is filled with warm lights, soft music, and the laughter of people I hardly know, Sarah's guests, whom she's invited to flaunt her perfect life. As her voice rises, their conversations quiet down, and I can feel their eyes sneaking towards the kitchen, feigning disinterest while pitying me. I set the tray on the counter, and the steam from the roasted vegetables fogs my glasses. I catch a glimpse of myself in the oven door, flushed cheeks, loose hair, and hunched shoulders as if bracing for a blow. I barely recognize the woman looking back at me. This kitchen, once a place of pride, now feels like a space where my self-worth dwindles with each passing day. Sarah appears in the doorway, arms crossed tightly across her chest, the same posture she takes in the corporate world when someone disappoints her. Mom, can you please pull yourself together? This night is important, she hisses, as if my very existence threatens the image she wants to project. A wave of anger and humiliation courses through me, but I stay silent. I pick up the tray again and head towards the dining room, pretending my heart isn't breaking. Little do they know, this Christmas Eve will be the last time Sarah speaks to me like this. 3 years ago, long before this fateful Christmas Eve, Sarah showed up at my doorstep looking as vulnerable as she did when she was a young girl. It was a cold February night in New York, and the air was so frigid it felt like needles on my skin. When I opened the door, snowflakes clung to Sarah's hair like tiny crystals. She stood there with her 2 kids, Lily and Ethan, sleepy and leaning against her legs, and her husband, David, hovering behind with a stack of suitcases. Mom, can we come in? She asked, her voice trembling slightly, and my heart ached. Without hesitation, I stepped aside. Lily stumbled in first, rubbing her eyes, and Ethan jumped straight into my arms as if he'd been waiting all day for this. David gave me an awkward smile, the kind people use when they're embarrassed but trying to be polite. They sat in the living room, still in their coats, explaining how the real estate market had turned against them. A deal had fallen through, and the apartment they'd planned to rent was suddenly unavailable. Their finances were tied up, and they needed just a few months to sort things out. I felt a softness well up inside me, the urge to help my daughter, even though she was a grown-up with a family of her own. I told them the guest rooms were ready and they could stay as long as they needed. Sarah burst into tears and hugged me so tightly that it hurt. In that moment, having them home felt right. My house had been too quiet since my husband passed away. Their laughter, their footsteps, and the chaos they brought filled the empty spaces. The first few months were idyllic. Sarah helped me cook on weekends, singing softly as she chopped vegetables. David fixed the leaky faucet in the bathroom. The kids filled every corner with their drawings and toys, and the house echoed with their innocent noise. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like a real family again, like the good old days before life pulled us apart. I convinced myself that this was a second chance, that living together would mend the small rifts between Sarah and me, the ones I'd always felt but never spoken about, like when she rushed through our conversations or skipped family gatherings because of work. But slowly, imperceptibly, things started to change. It began with small requests. Sarah would come home exhausted, drop her bag on the kitchen counter, and say, "Mom, could you start dinner? I've had a terrible day." I didn't mind. I knew she worked long hours at the company. Cooking was a way for me to relax. But then, the requests kept coming. She started asking me to pick up the kids from school when she was stuck in meetings. David would text me during the day, asking me to sign for packages or wait for the repairman. I told myself they were under a lot of stress and that families were supposed to help each other. But as time went on, these favors became expectations. One afternoon, when I mentioned the groceries, Sarah was pouring herself a glass of wine. I just gently reminded her that I hadn't seen their share of the bill in a while. She put her arm around my shoulders and kissed my cheek, the way she did when she was a child asking for something. Mom, do you know how much we'd spend on childcare if you weren't here? You're saving us so much, she said, with a tone that seemed sweet but had an underlying sense of entitlement. I laughed it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. However, it became harder to ignore the changes. They stopped asking and just assumed I'd take care of everything. The laundry, the lunchboxes, the grocery shopping, the school forms, all these tasks that used to be theirs gradually became mine. The first time I felt that something was seriously wrong was on a rainy Wednesday. I had a long-awaited doctor's appointment to address the pain in my back that had been getting worse. My neighbor, Lucy, had offered to drive me. But that morning, Sarah rushed into the kitchen in a panic. She had an important last-minute presentation, and the babysitter had cancelled. She looked at me like I was her only hope. Mom, please, can you watch the kids today? I can't mess this up. I didn't think twice and cancelled my appointment, promising myself I'd reschedule. But I never did. When Lucy came to pick me up and asked why I hadn't gone, I lied and said I'd forgotten. She just looked at me with a sad, knowing expression. Be careful, Linda, she said softly. You matter, too. Her words stayed with me longer than I wanted to admit. At that time, I had no idea how much worse things would get or how much of myself I would lose. By the middle of the second year, I was waking up before everyone else, moving around the house like a ghost. I packed lunches, started the laundry, unloaded the dishwasher, and made coffee for people who hardly noticed it was there. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that this was just a phase and that they'd get back on their feet soon. But the work never seemed to end. One evening, Sarah announced that she needed to host a dinner for some of her colleagues. I thought she meant we'd cook together and use the dining room. But on the night of the dinner, she walked into the kitchen in a sharp business suit, barely glancing at me. Mom, is the roast ready? They'll be here in 20 minutes, she said. In that moment, I realized she hadn't planned to do any of the cooking. The entire meal, from the menu to the serving, was on me. I felt my chest tighten, but I kept quiet. I carved the roast, plated the sides, and set the table exactly the way she liked it. When her colleagues arrived, I greeted them with a smile. But when Sarah introduced me, she didn't say, "This is my mom." Instead, she said, "This is Linda. She helps out around the house." Those words hit me hard and lingered long after the guests left, as I stood alone at the sink washing dishes that weren't mine. As Sarah's career soared, I became more and more invisible at home. She'd call from the office and say, "Mom, can you pick up Lily? I'm swamped." Or, "Mom, can you go to the pharmacy?" It was as if my time existed only to serve her. David wasn't any better. He'd drop a stack of bills on the kitchen counter without a word, as if it was my job to pay them. Whenever I hesitated, even for a second, Sarah would give me a look that made me feel like I was failing her. She'd call me dramatic when I said I needed a break, and eventually, I started to believe her. One day, when I was helping Ethan into his car seat, my back gave out. The pain was so intense that I let out a gasp. Sarah was in a hurry to leave for a meeting. When she saw me holding onto the car, she rolled her eyes. "Mom, please don't start this again." "I'm already late," she said. I swallowed the pain and forced a smile. "I'm fine. Go. I've got him." Her car door slammed before I could finish my sentence. Later that day, Lucy saw me struggling with a heavy bag of groceries. She walked over and took the bag from my hands without a word. "Linda, are you okay?" she asked, her voice full of concern. I shrugged it off, but the truth was, I was completely exhausted. It wasn't the kind of tiredness that sleep could fix, it was the kind that seeps into your soul when you feel your life slipping away. Lucy invited me over for tea. I almost declined, worried about falling behind on my chores, but there was something in her eyes that made me sit down. She studied me for a while, making me uncomfortable. "What's going on in your house?" she finally asked. I started to tell her little things: the missed doctor's appointment, the unpaid bills, the never-ending list of tasks. Lucy listened patiently, letting the silence fill the gaps until I was ready to speak again. When I finished, she placed her hand on mine. "Linda, this doesn't sound like family help. It sounds like you're being taken advantage of," she said. I felt my stomach turn. "They're just stressed. They need me," I said quickly. She squeezed my hand gently. "Needing you is one thing, but treating you like you have no life of your own is another. You deserve better." Her words shook me to the core. The idea that what I was going through had a name, that it was something more sinister than I'd allowed myself to think, was almost too much to bear. I left Lucy's house more troubled than when I arrived. Deep down, I knew she was right. And soon, something would happen that would shatter all my excuses. One ordinary Monday morning, I went upstairs to drop off a basket of folded clothes in David's study. The desk was cluttered with papers, coffee cups, and a stack of envelopes. I'd been in that room countless times before, but this time, when I set the basket down, my elbow knocked a thin file off the stack. The papers scattered across the floor. I bent down to pick them up, annoyed at my own clumsiness. Then, I saw my name printed in bold letters at the top of a document. Linda, proposed guardianship and long-term care plan. For a moment, everything around me went silent. I picked up the first page, telling myself it was a mistake, that it had nothing to do with me. But the words on the page were crystal clear. It detailed concerns about my declining mental abilities and increasing confusion, and it proposed that Sarah be appointed as my legal guardian to manage my affairs. There was also a draft plan to transfer my house into a trust controlled by Sarah and David for tax reasons and long-term planning. My hands started to shake. I told myself I shouldn't read anymore, that I was invading their privacy. But my name was on every page, and my life, my home, my independence were being dissected in cold, legal language. I read on. There were email exchanges between Sarah and a staff member at a nursing home an hour away. They were discussing availability for a long-term stay, asking about memory tests and insurance coverage. Another email mentioned the need to document signs of my disorientation. I felt sick to my stomach. I thought about all the times I'd canceled my own plans for them, how Sarah had dismissed my pain, and how she'd introduced me as a helper. Part of me refused to believe that my daughter, the girl I'd raised, the child who used to cuddle with me on rainy days, would do this to me. But another part of me, the part that was tired and worn out, knew the truth. I sat on the edge of the bed, the papers spread across my lap. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the words that were about to change my life. It felt like a betrayal deeper than anything I'd ever imagined, because it wasn't just about being used or ignored, it was an attempt to take away my voice. When I finally gathered the papers, I put them back in the file exactly as I'd found them. Before leaving the room, I took pictures of every page with shaking hands. I didn't know what I was going to do with them yet, but I knew I needed proof. That evening, the house seemed different. Sarah came home from work, talking excitedly about a new project. David asked what was for dinner. The kids ran past me with their backpacks open, homework spilling out. Everything looked normal on the surface, but inside, I was in turmoil. Sarah mentioned the folder in passing, saying she needed to work on some long-term plans. She didn't notice the way I froze, the way the light left my eyes. She just kept talking, assuming I'd listen. For the first time, I didn't. I excused myself and went next door to Lucy's. She opened the door and immediately knew something was wrong. My voice trembled as I told her what I'd found. She listened, her jaw tightening with each detail. When I finished, she didn't mince her words. "Linda, this isn't just taking advantage. This is an attempt to steal your life," she said firmly. Her words broke through the wall of denial I'd been hiding behind. I realized I wasn't overreacting. What I'd found was real and dangerous. Lucy took my hand and said we needed to talk to a lawyer, someone who could tell me my rights before Sarah and David made their next move. That night, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. For the first time in a long time, fear turned into determination. In the weeks that followed, I felt like I was living in my own house with a stranger's shadow following me. I moved quietly, watching and waiting, carrying the weight of my discovery like a heavy burden. Lucy kept urging me to meet with the lawyer she trusted, and after many sleepless nights, I finally agreed. The lawyer, Miss Thompson, had a warm office filled with shelves of case files and a soft, lit lamp. She looked younger than I expected, but her voice was calm and reassuring, like she'd seen cases like mine before. I showed her the pictures of the documents. She read each page carefully, her brow furrowing. "Linda," she said at last, "this isn't planning. This is an attempt to take control of your life. You're perfectly competent, and the law is on your side." Her words gave me the strength I'd been missing for so long. Ms. Thompson updated my legal documents, added protections to my house deed, and told me to keep records of everything. She said there might come a time when I'd have to stand up for myself publicly, and I needed to be prepared. I didn't know that the moment she spoke of would be on this Christmas Eve. After Sarah called me incompetent in front of her guests, a quiet resolve filled me. I finished setting the dinner on the table, every movement deliberate. Lucy sat at the end of the table, her eyes giving me silent support. My brother, Tom, who had come for the holidays, watched me with understanding. When Sarah lifted her glass to make a toast, her voice full of pride, I stood up before she could finish. "I need to speak," I said. The room fell silent. I walked to the sideboard, opened the drawer, and placed the printed documents on the table. The bold title stared back at us. Sarah's face turned pale. "These are the plans my daughter and her husband made for my life without my consent," I said. A wave of shock rippled through the guests. David sat up straight, searching for words. Sarah shook her head, tears in her eyes. "Mom, you're misunderstanding," she said. "No, I'm not," I said gently. "For once, I see the truth clearly." I told them about the guardianship proposal, the planned transfer of my house, and the discussions about placing me in a nursing home. I didn't raise my voice. The calmness came from finally facing the truth. Sarah stepped closer, her voice breaking. "I thought you needed help. You forget things. You get overwhelmed." "I forget because I'm exhausted, and I'm overwhelmed because you treat me like I'm not part of my own life," I replied. She started to cry, but this time, I didn't give in. I told them that legal protections were already in place, that they had 30 days to move out, and that if they continued with this, I'd take legal action. I also reminded them that I had witnesses who knew what had been going on. The guests gathered their coats and left in awkward silence. When the door closed, Sarah collapsed into a chair, sobbing. I stood beside her, feeling sad but also relieved. The truth had finally been spoken. In the weeks that followed, they packed their things. The house grew quiet again, but this time, the silence felt honest. I reclaimed my bedroom, painted the walls a warm color, and planted flowers in the garden. I joined a book club and started going for walks with Lucy in the mornings. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own life. Now, Sarah visits me with a newfound respect. She asks before entering a room and thanks me without being prompted. I listen to her, but I no longer shrink. Whatever the future holds, it will be based on the boundaries that should have been there all along. And as I stand in my kitchen today, with the sunlight warming the counter, I no longer hear Sarah calling me incompetent. Instead, I hear my own voice, strong and unafraid, saying, "I'm still here." And being present in my own life again feels like a victory I once thought was impossible.